guys. It's good to be back again. So today I'll be focusing on why I think African countries that they're putting their resources to the wrong form of development. Uh, I think what's affecting most African countries right now, it's something that I call the catch-up effect, where the fact that most African countries feel they've been left behind in terms of development are prioritizing the wrong things in an attempt to try and catch up to the a bit more developed countries like in Europe and in America. And this in turn is making that African countries not to invest in long-term projects, but to invest in in short-term satisfactory project. You know, short-term dopamine project. I'd put it like that because if you look at how the African countries are investing, or when they get money from the Chinese or from the World Bank, it's more to satisfy this short-term ambition, and there is not that drive to put allocation and resources to projects that will extend for or take more time. If you look at an example like Kenya, you look at Kenya. Kenya just completed building an express highway from the airport to a city called Westlands, and the highway has cost about $1 billion. $1 billion is 100 billion Kenya shillings. If you look at the statistics on the ground, the highway is meant to curb traffic, but if you look at the Kenyan statistics, it shows that 60% of Kenyans walk to work. And then you find another probably 30% use public transport, and only 5% or 10% use cars. So that express highway is meant only to benefit the 10%, because if 60% walk, couldn't it have been smart for the government to create better walkways, place for people to cycle to work? And since a lot of people, 30% use public transport, probably also create things like trams, massive transport system. So when you look at the architecture of how African countries are doing things, I think they are confusing development and being pushed to create this dopamine effect of when you create a highway like that, you feel like you've achieved something, but that's a short-term achievement, because if you look even at how the highway was built, it was built in a span of 2 years or 1.5 years. So its impact is not as it probably has an impact in ensuring that properties around Nairobi Westlands appreciate, but the impact on of that 100 billion Kenyan shillings, $1 billion, is not an impact that's going to drastically change or inflate the economy of Kenya in terms of growth. Because if we look at how the Asian tigers are assess their development, or countries like in Europe, for a country to develop, first of all, it needs to focus on three things. It needs to focus on economy, on healthcare, on education, and on healthcare, education, and food. So you find that most Asian tigers, they prioritize this because this has a long-lasting effect rather than building roads, railways, and a highway. And I think that's the lie that the African continent and Kenya is the new political class is peddling these days, because they keep on lying to people that you need roads, you need highways. Yes, I'm not disagreeing; they are very essential. But the best investment any leader can do to a country is leave a very good education in terms of their people being able to become very educated and become very productive, and the healthcare to be also good, so that life expectancy can go high, that people don't use a lot of money in healthcare, and that food production is high. But you find projects like the Express Highway have cost 100 billion, and you realize that Kenya this year is going through one of its worst drought in history. Cattle are dying everywhere. goats are dying everywhere, and you wonder what is the priority in African countries in terms of development? Are they looking? It appears to me it's a scenario of a person who lives in a mud house and wants to buy a Rolls Royce, because why would you invest 100 billion in a highway when there's no tapped water? When there's a drought that's killing your livestock. For me, it doesn't make sense. And that's why I'm saying Africa is investing in the wrong things. And all these projects are coming with debt. So eventually African countries have to pay have to pay this debt. So it's not free projects. So you even acquiring debt from projects that will not help us that much. Because if you are borrowing 100 billion Kenya shillings or $1 billion to invest it in education, that money will come back because now you will create a very sufficient labor force, a very educated labor force, and a labor force that the productivity will skyrocket. And in no time, even that $1 billion invested will see a lot of return because of the growth of the country. And the African people, I think, need to be warned that the development that's coming to Africa is a lie, because Africa is being the political class in Africa are trying to, to create an eye candy situation where you see something and you're happy, because if you see a highway in Nairobi, you think that's development. But if you look around Nairobi, most of the estates don't have water till today. Most of them don't have sanitary toilets, but there's $1 billion highway passing through there. And you start to wonder where are the priorities of African leaders and the African elite in general. And this is not an only case in Kenya, it's happening everywhere, in Uganda, in Tanzania. And you start to think, where is the platform of Africa? Because even though people are saying Africa is developing, it doesn't mean the other countries are stagnant. Because as Africans, you have this fantasization that Africa is developing, Africa is growing. Yeah, but it doesn't mean also that countries like China, America are stagnant. If Africa is growing, even them they are growing. Even them they're trying to calculate how to become better. So I think that's one thing that we should really, really focus. If you look at a country like South Korea, 90% of the population has a higher learning education. If you look at Kenya, it's only almost 4%. And South Korea and Kenya have the same population of 50 million people. So almost 50 million people in South Korea have an understanding of higher learning education. If you come to Kenya, it's only 4%. Remember, South Korea was poorer than Kenya by the time we gained independence, because after the Korean War, Kenya, in fact, loaned South Korea $1 million. Today, if you look, South Korea and Kenya have the same population, 50 million, but South Korea GDP is $1.5 trillion. The Kenyan GDP is 98 to 100 billion. So and why did the Asian Tiger achieve this kind of success? They achieved this kind of success because they invested in healthcare education and food. And after that, it was easy for their people to be a very productive force. In Africa, if you're building this railway, all this system in an illiterate population, these people won't know how to manage the resources or use the resources to their full effect. But you can see that the lack of the system having a good education is prompting leaders to build highways and sacrifice knowledge, because we are looking for self-satisfactory. You go to UK, probably Britain, you see the roads, and then you decide you're going to come and build that road, and not understanding that UK is 1,000 years old kingdom. You have to start somewhere, but you want to see and that's why you find that Africa has infrastructure, but the surrounding areas around those infrastructure are still dilapidated. The roads, you find that, for example, the expressway is a good road that's passing up, but the roads down there are still the same roads, very dirty. A lot of garbage. If you go under the express highway, there's a lot of posters, because you haven't addressed the main issue. You've just bought an infrastructure, and this is the risk, because if your people are not educated, they cannot know how to maintain this kind of infrastructure. If it rains today in Nairobi, if you go to Nairobi, if it rains today in Westlands, the whole the whole under that express highway will be flooded because it rained when I was around in Westlands, and it rained heavily, and floodings were everywhere. So these are the challenges that I'm seeing that African countries are facing. And we have leaders that are trying to compete with countries that have had experience in civilization and who understand economics and understand their politics very well. You know, their politics are the politics of people, not the politics of self-interest. In Africa, we have the same politics of self-interest. So I think it's time that probably African leaders, they need to be heavily engaged and to understand that the best investments they can leave for their countries is not roads and railways, and also all these sorts of things that incur countries in debt. And we also we know that all these projects are a scheme to steal money and eat, because at the end of the day, these projects are made by very high inflation prices. So my message there is that it's high time that we start looking at what we can do right, because this is not the way to grow Africa. People need to start understanding, and people need to start take action. Anyway, guys, please subscribe, like, and share, and see you then. Cheers.